Welcome, if you dare, to True Fear Files, the place where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs. In these files, we archive the most chilling, true paranormal encounters, stories so unnerving they'll haunt you long after the screen goes dark. These are not the tales of folklore nor the figments of an overactive imagination. No, these are real accounts, experiences that defy logic. Stories from those who face the unexplainable. Stories that will leave you questioning everything. So prepare yourself. For tonight, we delve into 5 true paranormal encounters that will leave you in fear. Our first story begins in a place that appeared to be an ordinary hotel, quiet, unassuming, and tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city. But in this seemingly peaceful hotel there was a room with a history so terrifying it had become a whispered legend among those who dared to stay. In 2013, Mark, a weary traveller, found himself arriving at this very hotel. After hours on the road, he just wanted a place to rest. He had no idea, however, that this night would change his life forever. He was about to check into room 317, a room that no guest would dare book if they knew its past. As Mark approached the front desk, he noticed something strange about the receptionist. An older woman, her eyes cold and distant, handed him the key to room 317. But there was something unsettling in the way she looked at him, something that felt like a warning. She paused just for a second before asking with an edge of caution, "You're staying in 317, are you sure?" Mark, not one to buy into ghost stories, shrugged off the woman's strange behavior. Little did he know room 317 was about to prove that some stories are far too real. Mark entered the room, hoping for a quiet night, but the atmosphere seemed wrong. A sudden chill swept over him, the temperature plummeting despite the heater running full blast. It was as if the room itself was refusing to warm up. As the hours passed, the room grew colder and colder. Mark tried to ignore it, but the air felt thick, almost suffocating. The television flickered erratically, and just when he thought he could relax, he heard it, a soft, distant knock on the door. At first, Mark thought it was just the building settling, the pipes creaking, but the knocking grew louder, faster, urgent, as if someone on the other side was desperate to get in. Mark checked the peephole. No one was there. Nothing. Just the empty, dimly lit hallway. But when he turned back to the room, the knocking continued, each thud more forceful than the last, rattling the door, shaking the walls. Mark froze, his heart pounding. It felt like someone was sitting beside him. The bed shifted, the covers were pulled back, and the space next to him grew unnaturally cold. Mark could feel the weight of something unseen pressing into the mattress. It was as if someone, or something, was lying there with him. He jumped up, turning the lights on, desperate to shake the feeling. But when the room lit up, the air felt even heavier, oppressive, suffocating. It was as if the darkness itself was pushing in, surrounding him, trapping him. As he rushed to the door, eager to escape, a voice, soft, almost pleading, whispered from behind him, "Stay with me, please." Mark bolted from the room, running down the hallway into the night. He never looked back, his heart pounding, the words, "Stay with me," echoing in his mind. To this day, Mark refuses to speak about what happened that night. But he's not the only one who has encountered the strange and terrifying happenings in room 317. Guests who stayed after him reported hearing whispers, cold hands brushing against their skin, and some even claimed to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. Some say room 317 is cursed, haunted by the restless spirit of a long-dead guest. And as the years pass, that spirit waits, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveller to check in. Would you be brave enough to stay in room 317? Or will you heed the warnings of those who came before you? The choice is yours. Not all forests are peaceful havens. Some are ancient places steeped in dark history where the land itself holds secrets, secrets that will never be uncovered. Our next story takes us to one such forest, a place where the trees seem to whisper and the shadows never leave. In 2015, Jacob, an experienced hiker, set off for a weekend adventure in a remote, little-known forest. Known to locals as Whispering Woods, the place had a bad reputation, but Jacob, being the skeptic he was, dismissed the warnings. What harm could a walk in the woods do? As Jacob ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, the atmosphere changed. The air became thick, heavy, and the further he walked, the more the forest seemed to close in on him. The trees grew darker, their branches twisting like claws reaching for the sky. Something ancient, something alive, seemed to watch him from every shadow. And then he saw it. At first, Jacob thought it was just a trick of the light, a play of shadows in the dense fog, but then it moved again, and this time it was closer. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. Jacob could feel the eyes of something or someone tracking his every move. It was no longer just the footsteps, it was a presence. Something was out there, just beyond his reach. And then he saw it again. This time, Jacob couldn't deny it. The figure was real, but what was it? A person or something else? The figure seemed to float, never quite touching the ground as it moved toward him, slowly, deliberately. With a surge of adrenaline, Jacob turned and ran. He didn't dare look back. His only focus was escaping the unnatural presence that was gaining on him. The trees blurred by him as he sprinted, his breath ragged in the thick, choking air. Jacob's lungs burned, his legs aching with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. The figure was behind him now, its footsteps crashing through the forest as it closed in, its grotesque shape moving faster than any human ever could. He turned, but the figure was already there. It towered over him, its form flickering like a faulty projection. But its eyes, if you could call them eyes, were the worst part. Hollow, dark voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. Jacob felt the air around him grow thick, suffocating. It was as if the forest itself was alive, holding him captive. The figure didn't speak, didn't move in a way that could be understood. It was something far beyond human. Jacob was never found. The search lasted for weeks, but the forest kept its secrets. No trace of him was left, and no one knows what happened to him that day. Some say Jacob's disappearance was the forest's doing, that whatever it was in those woods took him. Others believe the figure was a spirit, one that lingers, forever haunting those who enter its domain. Would you dare enter the Whispering Woods? Or will you listen to the warnings of those who have disappeared without a trace? The shadow still waits, hungry for its next victim. Have you ever been on the road at night, surrounded by nothing but the endless highway and the weight of silence? For some, it's peaceful, a time to think, but for others, that quiet can be unnerving. This next story is about a truck driver who found himself on a lonely stretch of road, unaware that the silence would soon be shattered by something beyond explanation. Mark had been driving for hours, the darkness of the road swallowing his headlights as he made his way through the night. A long-haul trucker, he'd seen his fair share of isolated highways, but tonight something felt different. This road was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. As he cruised along, his eyes darted to the rearview mirror, a reflex of habit. But something caught his attention, a figure, a silhouette sitting in the passenger seat. It was so sudden, so out of place that it stopped him cold, his breath caught in his throat. He glanced over at the empty passenger seat. Nobody was there. Thinking it was just his tired eyes playing tricks on him, Mark shook it off. But as he glanced back at the mirror, the figure was still there, its head turned slightly, as if looking at him, though its face remained obscured in the dim light. Mark's pulse quickened and his grip on the wheel tightened. He glanced again. No one, but every time he checked, the figure was closer, its outline becoming more defined, its presence unmistakable. The worst part wasn't the figure in the mirror. It was the feeling that it wasn't just watching him, it was waiting for something. Mark tried to ignore it, focusing on the road, but he couldn't shake the cold dread creeping over him. He checked the rearview mirror again, only this time the figure wasn't sitting, it was standing. Looming over the seat, its form dark and unnaturally tall, its features hidden by shadow. His heart raced as he looked at the road ahead, desperate to ignore the growing presence behind him. The headlights reflected off something in the mirror, something not just in the seat, but beside it. The air in the cab grew colder, a chill that seemed to seep from the very shadows themselves. Mark could feel it now. Something was wrong. The figure wasn't just a figment of his imagination, it was real. It was there with him. The figure leaned closer, and as Mark looked at the mirror one final time, it was almost face to face with him, its hollow, dark eyes staring into his soul. Terrified, Mark slammed on the brakes, pulling the truck off to the side of the road. He jumped out, stumbling into the cold night air, heart pounding in his chest. But when he turned back to the truck, the figure was gone. The seat was empty again. Mark didn't wait another second. He abandoned the truck right there on the side of the road, running into the darkness. He didn't stop until he found a gas station, shaken, confused, and terrified. When he returned to the truck hours later, it was as if nothing had ever happened. The figure was gone. The truck was empty, the cab still as silent as the night. Mark never spoke about what happened that night, at least not in detail. But to this day, he refuses to drive alone at night. He knows what he saw, and he knows that some roads should never be traveled alone. Some say the figure was a ghost. Others claim it was a warning. But one thing is for certain. Whatever it was, it still waits on those lonely stretches of highway, looking for its next rider. In a world connected by technology, we often forget that there are things we cannot explain, things that can slip through the cracks of our modern lives. Our next story takes us to one such moment, where a seemingly innocent phone call became something far more sinister. In 2011, Emily, a young woman living alone in the city, was relaxing in her apartment after a long day. The evening was quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the city outside her window was the only sound that filled the air, until the phone rang. At first, Emily thought it was just another telemarketer. But when she answered, the voice on the other end was soft, almost haunting. A man's voice, calm, yet carrying an unshakable sense of urgency. "Hello," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. The voice on the other end replied, "I'm right behind you." Emily froze. She turned around quickly, expecting to see someone standing in her apartment. But the room was empty. Her heart began to race as the silence grew unbearable. She chalked it up to a prank, hanging up in disbelief. But the phone rang again, almost immediately. Her stomach dropped as she stared at the screen, a sense of dread creeping over her. This time, when she answered, the voice was even closer. "I'm still here. Right behind you." Emily's hand shook as she clutched the phone. She turned around once more, scanning the room. Nothing. just shadows and the eerie quiet of the night. She felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine, but there was no one there, no one except the voice. Then, as if mocking her growing terror, the voice whispered, "I can see you." Frantically, Emily slammed the phone down and bolted to her door, checking the locks. She checked every room, but no one was inside. The silence was deafening. She felt trapped, like the walls themselves were closing in. That was when the phone rang once more, this time without the voice. Just a deep, unsettling silence on the other end. And then heavy breathing, ragged, shallow breaths, as if someone was right there, just behind her. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She called the police, but when they arrived, the apartment was completely normal. No one had been there, no signs of forced entry, no clues, just a woman terrified by a phone call that seemed to come from nowhere. To this day, Emily refuses to talk about the call, but she knows one thing for sure. The voice, whatever it was not human. Some say it was a ghost. Others believe it was something far darker, a presence that followed her home from beyond. Who or what was on the other end of the phone that night? And more importantly, is it still watching? The silence in Emily's apartment hasn't been the same since. Our next story takes us to an object most of us take for granted, something we look into every day. But what if what we see in the mirror isn't always what's truly there? Some mirrors aren't just reflections of what's in front of them. Some hold far darker secrets. In 2011, Samantha, an antique collector, bought a mirror from a quaint little shop in the heart of the city. It was beautiful, ornate, framed with intricate designs that seemed to whisper of a bygone era. But from the moment she brought it home, she felt uneasy. A strange, unsettling feeling lingered in the air whenever she was near it. As days passed, Samantha found herself drawn to the mirror, unable to look away. But the longer she stared into it, the more she began to notice something off. Something was wrong with her reflection. It wasn't quite her. There was something else there, lingering just behind her. One evening, while cleaning the glass, Samantha noticed a figure, a woman, standing just behind her reflection. But when she turned around, there was no one there. Her heart raced. She couldn't explain it, but the figure was real. The woman in the mirror was watching her, smiling ever so faintly. Terrified, Samantha covered the mirror and tried to push the thought out of her mind. But it didn't stop. Every time she walked past it, she felt a cold chill, as if the mirror was calling her, pulling her in. It was as if the reflection had a life of its own, something it wanted her to see, or perhaps something it wanted to show her. One night, after a long day, Samantha stood before the mirror again, her curiosity getting the better of her. This time, as she stared into the glass, she saw the woman again, but this time she was no longer just standing. The figure stepped forward, moving in sync with Samantha's own reflection, but the movements were slow, unnatural, jerky, almost like the figure was struggling to maintain its shape. The woman's eyes locked onto Samantha's, a cold, lifeless gaze that sent shivers down her spine. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the woman said, "You shouldn't have come here. This mirror is mine." Samantha stumbled back, but her reflection in the mirror didn't move. The woman's smile grew wider, more malicious, as if she knew exactly what Samantha was thinking, what she was about to do. And then the reflection started to move on its own, stepping out of the frame, coming closer and closer to Samantha. Panicking, Samantha turned away from the mirror and ran from the room, but the feeling of eyes on her never left. No matter where she went, the chilling presence of the woman followed. At night, she could hear soft, deliberate footsteps behind her, and every time she looked in a reflective surface, the woman was there, always smiling, always watching. Samantha eventually left the house, unable to bear the haunting presence of the woman in the mirror any longer. But no matter where she went, she couldn't escape. The reflection followed her, lingering just out of sight, whispering her name, always getting closer. Some say that the woman in the mirror was never truly human, that she was a spirit trapped within the glass, waiting for someone to release her. Others believe that the mirror itself is cursed, a doorway to another world, one where the reflection isn't just a reflection, but a living, breathing entity. The mirror was never found again, but those who have stayed in Samantha Ed's old house claim to see strange things in the reflective surfaces within the home, shadows that don't belong, figures lurking just beyond the glass. The woman in the mirror is still waiting. Would you dare look into a mirror that isn't just reflecting you but something far darker? Or will you heed the warnings of those who came before you and never dare gaze too long into the glass? These are just 5 of the countless paranormal encounters that blur the line between reality and the unknown. They leave us questioning what's truly out there and what's hiding just beyond our perception. If you ever find yourself face to face with the inexplicable, remember this: you might not be as alone as you think. Which of these chilling tales has haunted you the most? Which story keeps you up at night, wondering if the shadows are watching? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear what you think. But be careful, some things are better left unsaid. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss another spine-tingling tale from the True Fear File. You never know. Next time, the story could be about you. Until then, stay safe, and always remember, the darkest corners of the world are often the ones you can see. Keep your eyes open, and always watch your back.